What's up, guys? We're back in the shop today, and today we're fixing this. So today we've got a Chrysler PT Cruiser in with a very bad inner tie rod end, and so we're going to be replacing that. This is a super typical job for pretty much any car. The inner tie rods on a PT Cruiser are exactly like probably 85% of the cars on the road, so that's why I decided this would be a good example. But what you're going to do to start off is you're going to raise and support the vehicle. Once you've done that and remove the wheel on the side where the play is, the next thing that we're going to do is take this nut right here for the outer tie rod loose. Once that's removed, actually, first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this jam nut loose. You don't want to back it off very far right now. You just want to back it off a little bit, and then we're going to take this bottom nut for the outer tie rod loose. This isn't too bad of a job, and I'm not going to need a lot of tools for this. Basically, you're going to need a 22mm wrench for the jam nut. That's a pretty common size in most cars. Most of them are 22. This is going to be, I'm going to use a 3/4. You could also use a 19. This fits the best of what I found that I have. And then for the inner tie rod, this is the only specialty tool that you're going to need. And this is an inner tie rod socket. And these can be rented from local parts stores if you don't have one, or you can buy them from places. So step one, loosen this. Once you've backed that off a couple turns, then we're just going to take the other end and take this nut loose. Now, once those are both off, the next thing you have to do is separate these two. And here's where you have options again. One method would be to take one of these, which is a ball joint separator, and drive it in here. That will work, but you're prone to tear this boot. So another option is you can take a pretty large heavy hammer and hit right here along this face a few times, and if you hit it pretty good, usually it'll just pop out. Okay, so after striking this a few times pretty good on the side, we did get it to pop out. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to back this off of this inner tie rod, but you need to try to put it back as close to where it was as possible. Now, you're still going to need to have the car aligned afterwards, because there's no way you're going to get it exactly back. But what you can do is count the number of turns as you take it off, and then just make sure when you put it back, it goes back the same number. Then you're just going to take this jam nut the rest of the way off, because you need to get it out of your way. Okay, so I lied earlier. You are going to need some extra tools. To get this little clamp off, you're going to need some long needle nose. You can basically just grab this and squeeze it. And then once that clamp is pulled off, the trickiest part probably of the entire thing is the clamp that you might be able to see right back there at the far end of this boot. That is the hardest one by far to get to, but I'll show you a trick for that. Okay, so this next part is kind of hard to show you while I'm doing it, so I'm just going to explain it afterwards, because I think you'll be able to see it a lot better. But basically, this is what the inner clamp looks like. It's a single-use clamp, and it has this high spot right here. Basically, with that sitting in there, you're just going to take a long skinny pry bar or screwdriver, get it right up against that high spot. If you hit it a few times with a hammer, it will knock it apart. Once that's apart, you can grab it, pull it forward, the entire boot, and usually twist, although this one is kind of stuck. Okay, and then once you have this boot completely off, you can see the tie rod in there. This one is a really, really bad one. Then what you're going to check for is locks. On some cars there is a lock back there that you have to actually undo to get it to come loose. On this one there isn't one of those. So you're just going to take this, it goes all the way down till it stops. Then if you turn it, you feel it lock on. So then all you're going to do is take a socket and a ratchet and turn this end to break it loose. Just unscrews normally. So what I used to do that was just this 1/2-inch drive ratchet and this socket. Here's what the tie rod looks like removed, and there is the rack piece that it screws into. Okay, so this is the replacement part. Some things to note that it comes with: this grease is for lubricating this joint. You have to just sort of cram it down in there as best you can because there are no grease fittings on these. This is Loctite. This goes on this side. Whatever you do, do not put it on this side or you're going to have a serious problem. But that does go on these threads prior to putting them in. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to take this little spacer right here and transfer it over to this one. Okay, so then once you've got all your prep stuff done, everything's transferred over, you're going to leave this jam nut off and you're just going to start it right back the way the old one came out, which you may have to kind of straighten it to keep it from wobbling and not wanting to thread in. But once you thread it in a little bit and get that straight, you're just going to use your tool from before to tighten it the rest of the way down. Good and decently tight by hand is okay on this. You basically want it to feel about like it did when you took it off. Then comes the other trick part that I mentioned earlier. You're going to put a zip tie around the end of this. Getting that clamp back in there is almost impossible without removing the rack, which we're trying to avoid doing. So you put the zip tie around the end, leave it loose. When you get it in there, all you got to do is reach in there or get in there with pliers and tighten this zip tie pretty decently. It sits in a groove on the rack anyway, so there's no way for it to come off. That just keeps it from being able to expand. So that is the next part. There will be a groove on this front piece that you'll feel this kind of sit in. So you're just going to sit that there and then put that clamp back. The next thing I do is just put a small dab of anti-seize on there just to help with keeping from having these rust up and seize together. Then you're just going to run the new jam nut on and make sure that you run it back a pretty good way so you have plenty of room to get that outer tie rod back on. Then once you've run this back on, sit it in here to hold it for the moment and back this jam nut back up until they meet. Then if you're planning on having this aligned right afterwards, which I hope that you are, you don't need to go too crazy with this. Just barely snug it because the alignment technicians are going to need to break it loose to adjust it anyway. Then we're going to put this nut back. Then once you have torqued this nut to its manufacturer spec and everything is seated there, the next thing you got to remember to do is to grease this outer joint. That does have a grease fitting, so it does need to be greased. To do that, I'm just using a standard grease gun like you could get anywhere, and I just hit it 4 or 5 good times to make sure that that joint is full of grease. Then all there is left to do is reinstall the wheel. Make sure you torque the lug nuts to the manufacturer spec in the correct pattern for your bolt pattern. Then you're just going to sit it down, take it, have it aligned, and you are good to go. If you enjoyed this video, make sure that you hit the like button so that I will know to keep making them. Also, if you're new here, subscribe to my channel, check out my other videos. There'll be links to all of that at the end. And I appreciate you guys watching. As always, thank you, and we will see you next time.